it's not about how much do I owe God, and then I get to keep the rest. Which
that's
like,
problematic.
That's the problem a lot of the time, right? And then like we'll say, well, I tithe 10%, so I pat myself on the back. I've done my duty, and like, you know, now I can go get Sunday brunch with the kids after Mass. Like it's the wrong way of looking at it.
It's a great point.
Doesn't mean you can't get Sunday brunch, but it's more like, how are you being steward of what God's giving you? Welcome to the In Spirit podcast from Amoris Christi. Join us as we explore current events and all manner of fascinating topics and explore their connections to Christian living.
All right, welcome to another episode of the In Spirit podcast. Once again, joined by our usual crew. Welcome, guys. How you been doing?
Pretty good.
Exciting times. We're in the middle of a conclave. We saw our first black smoke today as we're recording. So just some exciting times. Don't know what's going to happen next over the next couple of days.
Yeah, we were saying right beforehand that probably by the time this episode is even edited, we might have a new pope. So this will be quickly out of date, I'm sure. But it is exciting times. Do you have a favorite parting memory of Pope Francis, Anthony? I'm sure you got many.
Yeah, I've got many. I think maybe the washing of the feet of the prisoners that he did every Holy Thursday was always a beautiful image that always I keep in mind. And so, it's probably one of my favorite memories of him.
Yeah.
What about you guys? You guys have any favorite memories of our beloved Holy Father?
I mean, I really love his message in Brazil. I think it was at the vigil of the World Youth Day, where he asked the young people not to be, to be wary of sofa happiness.
Yeah.
Oh, what is it? A
couch potatoes.
Potato? Yeah. But he had this. I think he had this phrase of sofa happiness, where you just like you're like drugged. You know, you're just passive. You're just letting other people with other interests control your life and your destiny. And he basically challenged everyone to leave your mark on the world.
Yeah,
you know?
I remember that.
That's powerful.
At Hagan Leo became like a trademark of Francis, right? Go make a mess.
Yeah.
That's true.
That was from that prayer ritual, yeah. What about you, Chris?
Oh, man. I mean, I definitely have some favorite moments, but one moment I think more recently that stands out in my mind is just some of the things he said in his last encyclical, his Dilexit Nos on the Sacred Heart. Is very profound and just like
amazing.
Yeah, his call just for the world to like rediscover its heart through the heart of Jesus. So many things there that I'm sure we'll be unpacking for a long time. But speaking of documents from Pope Francis, I actually recently re-listened to The Name of God is Mercy, and I always loved like the Pope's he had these little like Francis-isms, and he was talking about the difference between a sinner and somebody who is corrupt, and the interviewer is asking him like, what's the difference? And the Pope's explaining how like a corrupt person is very cold, a corrupt person is like kind of like habituated this sinful way of seeing the world. It's ego, it's pride, it's hardness, it's mercilessness. And then he said, like my grandmother used to say of such people that butter wouldn't melt in their mouth. And it's just like, he was so good at like those kinds of phrases. Yeah. So, but segueing from that to today's topic, we're actually talking about wealth. So I guess unfortunately or fortunately, the ideas of wealth and corruption seem to go hand in hand.
Yeah. No, and it's a topic we thought we can talk about in detail about our perception of wealth, but just start off, is making money a bad thing or a good thing, or how should we even approach it? You know,
not if you're American.
Are you?
Oh yeah.
Just kidding. Well, you know, I think that we've seen a lot of shifting attitudes towards money, even just over the course of history, right? Like it used to be for a very long time that even charging interest on a loan was basically considered, basically a sin by the church. And like we've since then altered our understanding with the rise of modern commerce and modern financial institutions, where basically like, the idea is it's like you're paying somebody for the service of holding your money.
Yeah, but there's some nuance to that too. But
yeah, well, go ahead.
Well, with that in particular, I think what's primarily meant, as far as I understand, is that like a person would borrow money because they are broke, so they can't make their ends meet. Like, for example, they can't buy food or whatever, so they go in, they try to borrow money from somebody, like, please help me, I'm in desperate straits, and then if that person borrows money from you, and then you're like, oh no, you have to pay me that plus pay more, it's a form of exploitation of the poor.
That's true.
Whereas, in the modern economy, it's like recommended to borrow money in certain cases, even if you have the money. You know what I mean? Like even if you have the money to buy a house, people will still buy it on a mortgage.
Right. To show that you can reliably pay it back, basically.
Well, that's one, if you want to build credit history. But the other is because when the house appreciates, as it generally always does, you get leverage. So like you might have only put a $20,000 down payment on a $200,000 house. And then when it increases by 10% and it becomes $220,000, now you just double your money because you only put in $20,000 and it became $40,000. Right. So it's like leveraging, and so people will do that so that they have more free money to invest elsewhere, So it's just a very different. Those things didn't exist back then.
Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, and even the idea of a bank didn't really exist until like the modern era for similar reasons. It was just like, wealth was what you could basically hold on to using your own strength, like literally your own strength. Like people, like armies were raised to defend wealth a lot of the time. And wealth, especially like you wind back the clock to the ancient world, wealth wasn't even always like monetary things per se. It was like grain. Like Egypt was the breadbasket of the ancient world. Their grain was kind of their most valuable product. But like that was defended by militaries. And then like the rise of like the modern era where, I mean, certainly no less wars, but like we found more sophisticated ways to protect money. And then the idea of like exchanging, protecting, holding on to money as like a public service, basically, it began to evolve. And so now you have banks. But I think that maybe we're deviating a little from the original question, which is like, is wealth a good thing? Is making money a good thing? We've certainly made it more sophisticated.
Yeah.
But
it's good to know a little bit of the history, but how should we?
Yeah, I mean, so that's the only thing. I mean, it's good to know that when you're looking at different like moral precepts from different eras, you have to understand them in their relative context. Because one of the things that the Bible talks about is like if a person owes you money and then how does it work? I think you hold his cot or something like that, sort of as collateral, saying like, okay, when you pay me this, I'll give it back to you. They say, but you still have to give it back to him at the end of each day because he has nothing else to sleep on. Right. Yeah. So it's very clear they're talking about poor people who literally can't make ends meet. Right. And so that is like, that is the moral principle that endures through time. Right? The danger is always exploitation. That's always the moral evil that we have to be vigilant of. Even if we come up with very sophisticated systems, if at the end of the day, if the poor are being exploited, then, we have to reevaluate, not just reevaluate, we have to make a change. But fundamentally, like logically, I mean, it can't be bad to make money. I mean, why? Because I think of money as, in very simple terms, as an IOU, right? So if a person has accumulated money, that means that many people have given him their IOUs, and which means that he's rendered some service to them, something that they value. He's given them something that they value. And so in return, they've given him this IOU, and then you have a whole market of IOUs. So I don't have to use that IOU. Like, so in other words, if I like mowed Chris's lawn and he's like, hey, I owe you one, with currency, I don't have to use that IOU on Chris and say, now you have to mow my lawn. I could use it somewhere else.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That's amazing. It's really beautiful perspective of like, in a way, it's like value for your service. In a way, you know.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
what it
yeah,
is, value.
Yeah,
You know?
and like we'll talk a lot in, for instance, like in investing, they'll talk a lot about like things that are stores of value. Like for instance, precious metals are a store of value, and property is a store of value. But like basically, even currency is that, in exactly the way that you're talking about. It's a form of kind of putting into an exchangeable thing, an exchangeable item. Like this item has value. Why does it have value? Well, because we say it has value.
Yeah, but especially with currency, you
Right.
know, because with precious metals, you might say, well, okay, you can, you know,
More valuable to some people than other people.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
worth more at different times than other times.
right. But like currency in and of itself means absolutely nothing. It's just a piece of paper, you know,
Right.
it's not even like a precious metal or something like that. So it's just a placeholder for for IOUs, you know,
Yeah.
and it's just a sophisticated way of managing it. So the hard thing to comprehend for many people is that in a pure system, let's just say in an ideal system, what is a wealthy person? A wealthy person is the person who has rendered the most service and didn't take as much service. You know, because if you rendered as much service as you've received, then you'd be net zero.
Right.
Yeah.
Or if you take more in than you give, then you'd be in debt. But if you give more than you take, then you'll be rich. You know, that's so when you see somebody like Bill Gates, you're like, oh, he made something that's used by like, God
Probably
only knows,
billions.
Billions.
definitely billions, billions of people. So, okay. So therefore, you know, he has all these IOUs, you know, in a sense. I mean, the part where it breaks from the ideal in many cases. I mean, one of them is, I think, is inheritance.
Yeah. I also thought of like speculation.
Yeah, well, we had to get there too. That's a whole other, but like inheritance, like, okay, and this is where it's tricky, because do I have a right to the wealth that my parents made? I mean, I don't know. It's kind of tricky. I don't know how to answer that question. But then also land, I think, is tricky too, because what makes this land yours? You know, like sometimes if you look at the animal kingdom, you know, their territories are much more fluid, you know. It's just like a bird will just be like making this sound.
Fluid, literally. Sometimes they usually mark it that way.
Okay. Yeah, fair point. You know, so they're marking it in different ways dynamically as they're moving around. I mean, you know, I've heard some astronaut or something say once, when you look at the Earth from space, you know, you don't see any boundaries. You know what I mean? And I mean, that's actually true. Like, you know, so anyway, those things can make wealth a little trickier, because if you've inherited like a gazillion acres of land and all this stuff, you know, and you just own that now, and then, but in the ideal system, I think it's services rendered, you know.
And there's a value given for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then, I guess, you know, following up on that would be, as a Christian looking at scripture, we have the rich young man, Zacchaeus. It's easier for a camel to go to the eye of the needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. You cannot serve both God and money. So how do we kind of approach that? You know, if it is a value for service, you know, then why is there so much of in a way, a negative connotation, you could say, in scripture towards wealth?
Well, it's interesting. I'd actually like to bring up another scripture with that. It's probably one of the most misquoted scriptures in the entire Bible, which is, a lot of people say money is the root of all evil, when that's, of course, not what the scripture says. It says the love of money is the root of all evil. And it speaks to the nature of what money, or if you want to substitute the word money with property, is, like what it unlocks for you. It gives you the potential to do different things in the world, and that feels very empowering as somebody who holds a lot of property, because it can give the illusion that you can write your will onto reality and onto other people even. And the more money you have, then the more things you can, like the more ways you can impose your will on reality. And so you see how like money unlocks the doors to pride and ego, and imposing my will on the world and other people very quickly. So in that sense, when the scripture says love of money is the root of all evil, it kind of makes perfect sense.
Although we should be clear that when you say imposing your will, we're not talking about coercion, because that's the difference between political power and financial power,
right.
Because people actually want your money.
Mm-hmm. Which makes it all the more seductive.
Yeah, right.
It has it because of the fact that by its nature it's seductive. It's not something that is an unpleasant thing that like somebody's trying to avoid or even considers a necessity. Like we like stuff, and it's very counter to the ways of the world for somebody to renounce stuff, like in pure and simple terms.
I mean, yeah, I think in whatever way in which you find yourself superior to your fellow man, there's a risk. You know, so you can have great political power. I mean, you look at the scriptures, like most of the kings were corrupt, you know, in terms of in the Old Testament. And therefore you have a few great kings that shine, like, of course, David and such. But most of them were, it says that they did evil in the sight of the Lord, you know, because, so to me, it's not a question of legitimacy, you know, of like, yeah, even if all of your money was justly earned because you just, all you did every day, let's just say, is you just mowed everybody's lawn and you never spent $1, you know, you just lived like a very ascetic life, very simple. And then you became the richest person in town, just suppose, right? It doesn't matter. Even if you work the hardest, you're now in a superior position relative to everyone else, maybe who is dumb and who just spent away all their money. And that puts you in a precarious position, you know, because when you're superior to others, you can fall into pride, you can exploit others. And that being in that superior position is something that people lust after, you know, that human beings lust after, whether that's political, financial, or in terms of appearance, you know, good looks, any way in which you can establish yourself as superior to others.
Because all these are forms of power, really. And it somehow like entices us and attracts us and draws us. Even like, you know, we have to fight very hard against that inclination of our nature. And like even all the great philosophical and religious traditions like recognize like this is a pan-human issue. Like we all have this inclination in us to like seek power. And a lot of times it's not for bad reasons, at least at first. Sometimes maybe it is, but you know, many people are simply seeking the means to defend themselves or provide for other people, which are noble things. But then we see so many times that turns, and sometimes it's sudden, but oftentimes it's gradual. And it seems like for many people, that turn is represented by like exactly what you're saying, like that desire to kind of extend myself out into the world and above other people. And I
mean, and it's in animals too.
Right. Yeah,
you know?
That's true.
Yeah,
it's not even just pan-human.
Yeah, right. Yeah, fighting to be the alpha and such, you know. So it's to me, it's all just different forms, manifestations of that. And money is particularly dangerous because it's, in a sense, it's unlimited. Like a person could keep acquiring more and more and more and more and more, you know, and unless there's like a revolution or something like that, there would be no real way to stop him, you know?
Yeah. So is that what you think that money in a way can do that probably, I don't know, any other goods in this world could not, can affect us? Is that particular to money? You think that it gives you a sense of superiority, it gives you a sense of power,
well, I think
and that's what the scripture is kind of pointing towards us.
Yeah, I think that the allure of money is particularly strong, but I also don't think it's unique to money. I also think that food is alluring in a very similar way to money. And the reason I say that is because it's a necessity for survival. But in excess, it quickly becomes deadly to a person, physically or spiritually. It's even interesting how a lot of times like we put those things together. Like wealthy people tend to be like gluttonous because it's like that feeling of excess, right? Money is alluring in its own unique ways, but at the heart of it, it's a good thing, or at least a morally neutral thing, I suppose, that we kind of need in order to get through our day-to-day life.
Yeah.
Versus like other alluring things that we don't need, which we consider, like those things over there that, don't get lost in those fantasies, don't get lost in that facade. But with money, it's like, well, okay, I got to pay for my next meal, so like it's hard because we're never totally separated from that allure. Like we'll always have to be in contact with money in order to go about our day-to-day business.
Yeah, but it's also not just something for meeting our basic needs,
Right.
See, like having capability can't be intrinsically bad, right? Think about somebody who's like a genius, like somebody like Einstein, or what's his name from the Oppenheimer. That's a great that plays, the movie and all of that plays on this idea, right? Because you have great intelligence, but now are you going to become the destroyer of worlds, right? And so somebody with great intelligence, in a sense, can be in the same position. So, but that can't mean that having great intelligence is intrinsically bad. And I think with money as well, like, remember, there are many kings who were saints, right?
King Louis.
King Louis, yeah. So with their wealth, they brought about great good. They could only bring about that good because of their power.
Yeah.
And so similarly with a person with great wealth, I think one of the nice things in America is we have all these different trusts left by wealthy people, rather than just giving it all to all their family or whatever they wanted. They're like, I'm going to set up this trust, which is going to continue to help the church or help the poor for generations to come. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, we can't see it as intrinsically bad, even though it's very easy to get corrupt with money, and it's very easy to be corrupt with political power too, right? Yeah. Those are like dangerous. They're so dangerous that when we say politician, right?
Yeah.
What's the first thing that pops in your mind? It's like corrupt.
Yeah.
That's how dangerous it is, So
money.
I think if you wanted to be wealthy and to be a Christian, you'd have to be governed, or a politician and a Christian, you'd have to be governed you'd have to have a really solid interior, to keep you on the right track, on the right path. Yeah.
And it speaks to like how those wealthy people who did live virtuous lives were so noteworthy to the church, just because it's kind of not the norm.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I think, just adding on to that as well, like, so as a Christian, living out in this world, doing your job and doing well, how should we kind of navigate that internal struggle of, okay, I want to do well, if I do well, I make more money, but at the same time, I want to, not let it corrupt me in a way. So how do we kind of navigate that struggle that probably many Christians, I guess are navigating? Is this too much? How do I kind of,
I mean, I think that for a Christian, the fundamental thing is that even if you worked really hard, you studied really hard, you went to medical school, and then you did like a 5-year fellowship or whatever, for these specialized things, and you did all of that, and then you're like, all right, so I earned this. But for a Christian, you're always aware that you only earned it in the secondary sense, because everything that you have, everything that you used in a sense to attain your current status is a gift. And I think personally, I like something that I've come to realize in my prayer, not only is it a gift that's like given at birth, but it's continually given, and the Lord is free to take it away and give as he pleases, like you're living in that, in suspense, in a sense that everything is a gift. And therefore, I have used it well. I've worked hard, and maybe that's given me a place of higher status. So now I have to be conscious of why has the Lord given me this position of higher status? What is it for? Is it for me to indulge myself and, just stuff myself with all kinds of food and drink and parties and all that stuff? No. What has he given me this status for? And that's what we see in the wealthy saints. And the traditional wisdom of the church has been that wealthy people save their souls by giving, like the poor have in a sense, an upper, they have an advantage, by the fact that they're poor and the Lord hears the cry of the poor and such.
Yeah.
But for wealthy people, they can attain that advantage by being very generous and giving, right?
Yeah.
I think that one thing that we just sort of classically say about any possessions is like, do you own your possessions or do your possessions own you? I think that's a really great litmus test for really anything I own, not just money, but like wealth. And I think wealth really is a good word, because wealth encompasses not just money, but like all of my possessions. So do I own my wealth, or does my wealth own me? To play off of your point, Father, I think that it's important, and you see this a lot in the social teachings of the church, although the foundations are biblical, that we're never truly owners of what we own. We are stewards. That doesn't mean that property doesn't exist, which I think is like what some might say. It's not like that. It's like we own things, but we never own things in a final way.
Exactly.
And like you said, secondary. And we have saints such as, of course, I think like the pinnacle example in our tradition is probably St. Francis, who just like radically embraced poverty and was so keen on the fact, and it's such a core element of the Franciscan spirituality, that like we're born into this world with nothing and we leave it with nothing. And, poverty is something that never really is separate from us. We are given what we have for some period of time, maybe our whole lives, but at the end of the day, like it has to continue onward when we go onward. So, this idea of being a steward, as you said, like using what I have responsibly, I think that's such a core element of understanding wealth from a Christian point of view. If that's not there, then it's almost like I'm looking at the question wrong. And this is also something that comes up with St. Ignatius, like when he's talking about, living under the banner of Christ and principle and foundation and like all these kinds of things. It's like you don't hold on to like, okay, like you don't look at everything you own and say, all right, I got this much stuff. How much of it am I going to give to the Lord, and how much of it am I going to keep for myself? Is it like 50-50, 90-10? And Ignatius' response is basically, it doesn't matter if it's like 99 goes to the Lord and you keep 1%, you're asking the wrong question. It's all from God. It's all from him, and it all will return to him in the end. So don't ask like, how much should I be giving to the Lord? Because it's all his. It's more a question is like, how are you going to use it in the way that he desires? To what you said, how will you be a steward of it? Not like, and I think this comes up, I think sometimes this comes up in the question of tithing. Yeah. Like, what's the right amount to give? It's like, well, yeah, there's like practical things there, but when you go down into like the spiritual heart of things, it's not about how much do I owe God and then I get to keep the rest. Which
that's
like,
problematic.
That's the problem a lot of the time, right? And then like we'll say, well, I tithe 10%, so I pat myself on the back. I've done my duty, and like, now I can go get Sunday brunch with the kids after Mass. Like it's the wrong way of looking at it.
It's a great point.
Doesn't mean you can't get Sunday brunch, but it's more like, how are you being steward of what God's giving you?
Yeah. I think what you guys both are saying, that there is, in a way, a responsibility that we have with the wealth that's given to us. Because like you both guys said, it it's an understanding of all this is a gift from God. But just trying to go a little bit more into that, so then even bringing up the question of tithing, what does it mean then to give generously as a wealthy person or person making money?
I don't think it looks like a certain percentage. I mean, when you're making a practical evaluation of your budget and your finances, that's one thing. But as a general rule for like everybody in existence, I don't think it's as simple as well, as long as it's like above this threshold, like that, I think that it's a little more complex than that.
Yeah, because I think we have, in a way, a responsibility to take care of our family, with the wealth that's given to us, a responsibility to others. But then after that responsibility, I guess, there's that question of, is it, is it luxurious? Is this luxury at this point, or is it okay?
Is luxury even a bad thing though?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I personally would prefer to look at it through the lens of luxury and excess as opposed to wealth. Meaning, see, here's the thing. Let's say there's a wealthy person and he has a lot of money in his bank. Suppose he has $10 million. And he says, well, I don't need $10 million, so I should give $9 million to the poor. The challenge with that is that, the way capital works is that you can utilize capital to generate more capital.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's typically what any wealthy person would do. They'd be investing their money, and it's not likely that they're just holding it as cash. Right. It's probably in all kinds of investments.
Actually, even that comes up in the scripture passage with the talents, right? It's like you could have put that talent you buried in the bank.
That's true. Yeah. You got to trade it on the stock market. Yeah. So they're generating wealth. Secondly, when they're employing their money, it's most likely also creating jobs and stimulating the economy and all of that stuff. So it's not black and white in the sense of that, well, I have $10 million, I don't need it, so let me give it away. Yeah. However, what is perhaps more black and white is this question of excess of consumption. Like, I'm one human being. At the end of the day, so I'm pretending right now that I'm a very rich person, okay? Right. At the end of the day, I'm this big multimillionaire, but at the end of the day, I'm just flesh and bones like every other human being on this planet. So do I need to consume so much and live such a luxurious life, whereas, other people have to live in this way, right? That's where I do think that there could be more of a moral judgment. And I'm not trying to say that we have to look at the poorest person on earth and everybody has to adapt that standard of life, Yeah. But it is interesting that most of us, we always point fingers at those who are wealthier than us. We never look at the people who are poorer than us and say, wow, I'm this big, fat, wealthy, greedy person. Even though we live in like the top, 1% or something of the world's population, like our daily life is considered luxurious relative to most people on this earth. If you look at a good way to measure a good approximation of the relative wealth that you enjoy is the GDP per capita of your country, and the GDP, like I've looked at India, for example, it's like 30 Indians equals 1 American in terms of GDP per capita. The amount of wealth that we just enjoy by virtue of living in this country is equivalent to the wealth of 30 people in India. Yeah. But we never think about that. Whenever we talk about the wealthy people, we think about people above us, right? Whenever you think about, wow, that house is way too big, we're looking at people who have a bigger house than us. We never look at our house relative to people who have smaller houses. Yeah. So
there may be room to look at people who have more money than us, but there's always that. I think what you're speaking to is like, there's that hypocrisy sometimes that's in us. Is like, hey, like, have I checked my own? Have I cleaned my own room? Have I checked my own house?
No, all I'm saying is, where would you draw the line?
And who draws the line?
Because I guarantee you, if you talk to people in Haiti right now, they're not going to draw the line where we draw the line. I mean, they look at us as being wealthy.
That's a good point too.
No,
Yeah.
that's a great point. It also makes me think of, of myself, of like, where am I in relative to them? Where am I relative to them? And I didn't consider myself wealthy, but then now, like, when you look at it in that perspective, yes. And what is my responsibility towards them now? And so that's a great point.
So all I'm trying to say is that even that, though I said it's black and white, is not as black and white as perhaps we'd like it to be. But that is a place, I think, at least you can have some moral judgment about, hey, I think I'm living too luxuriously and I need to simplify my life, and if I have been given great wealth, I want to utilize it for good, not just for, indulging all my desires, my pleasurable desires or whatever. And I think that is a place where you can make a moral judgment and examine one's conscience and stuff like that.
What do you guys think about the idea of security when it comes to money?
It's very tough.
Because I know, I've certainly experienced it myself in my time in the workforce, but the reason I mention is because, like, somehow through prayer, through life experience, like, come to this insight of just like, this is really like a common idol for like good working class Christians a lot of the time. This idea of security, and I say idol because, like, security itself, objectively, or kind of in a removed context, is a good thing, but it can become an idol, and you'll kind of know when it becomes an idol because you'll never feel secure enough. But I think that for both of you, like, you might have more personal experience of it just coming from immigrant families and your backgrounds, but, like, what do you think about this? Like, how have you seen this?
It's a tough question, because you take the most, like, reduce it to the simplest example, right? Let's say you have a family and you have 3 little kids, and I don't know, let's say you're building a house here in Florida. Well, if you don't have the means, you build whatever house you can. But if you have the means, wouldn't you want to make it hurricane proof to protect your children? Or if you're buying a car, wouldn't you want to buy the most safe, secure car to protect your family, your wife and kids? And so if you limit it to like some specific example, you see that it's actually it's a difficult question to answer, because in a sense, you can't blame somebody for using their means to obtain the greatest possible security they can, because that's what everybody does.
Right. And more than not blame them, I'd say that's a commendable thing. It's a good thing.
Yeah. So that's why, in a sense, that's why the poor are fortunate, because see, when we look at the poor with great admiration, we have to also remember that if they became rich, we don't know if we would still have the same admiration for them. For any individual, we don't know. Because in a sense, the limited means protects you, and forces you to rely on God and to live a simple, humble life, But when you have the means, now you have to use the judgment that you're talking about to say, okay, I technically have the means to protect myself from a nuclear fallout. Our family could be the only one surviving in this whole state. But does that mean that I should? Or do I need to embrace a level of insecurity, and I don't know, be equal with my peers to a certain extent?
Yeah. But I guess it becomes all relative then at that point, right?
Well,
it's a tough question. Yeah.
I think you can push that even further too, because a lot of times these, like you had mentioned, like kind of specific cases, a lot of times these things seem to remain almost in the realm of hypotheticals. Like we mentioned, money in particular being a form of power. And when it comes to this idea of like security, and especially when it starts to kind of have a grip on me, then it's like I'm not buying the safer car or the hurricane-proof windows or making the fallout shelter. It's staying in the bank, and it's just accruing and accruing and accruing and accruing. And in my mind, I'm saying, one day I'm going to need that. But it never...
Oh, you're talking about like financial security.
Right, financial security.
Yeah.
But it never looks like anything. It just continues to accrue and accrue, because there's some anxiety in my mind where I have to have that money available for some indeterminate potential crisis or difficult situation or food shortage or whatever,
which could happen.
It could happen, but like
that's why we pay for insurance,
right? But I think that the problem that I've even just personally experienced is like you're never going to be secure enough if you follow that way of thinking. If you follow that way of being, you can have like 4 mortgages worth of money in your bank account and still be beholden to this idea of like, but I need more. Like, how secure can you really be?
And yet you need some. Yeah. Because, for example, if you have a family member, a lot of people struggle with this. They have some brother or somebody who just never saves any money. And then all of a sudden he's in crisis and he's coming begging at everybody's door. And they're like, look, man, you never saved your own money. You were just out there,
right,
like living irresponsibly, So,
yeah, I think it comes down to even making financial security an idol in itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I
mean, it's not the idea of security. It's more like, does it have a grip on your soul?
Yeah.
Like, does it control you?
And I think that's probably what's unique to the challenges of money and, everything that comes along with it that probably many other goods probably don't have, right?
Yeah. And this is a very practical, concrete thing that many Christian families have to discern.
Yeah.
And I think, that is the best way to go forward is through discernment because there is no formulaic answer. When a Christian family is saying, hey, I think we feel called to give this money to support these poor children in another country, they're doing it knowing that they're compromising the security and the future of their own children. Yeah. Because, okay, that money could go into their college account or whatever, but we're going to give it to these children instead. And I think that has to come from a place of discernment, and it's not just there's no automatic answer.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of when we talk about risk, that if you really want to be absolute about it, we're always going to live with some degree of risk in our lives. Every time I get in my car, I'm taking a risk. I mean, if you really want to get technical about it, every time I get out of my bed, I'm taking a risk.
And you're putting everyone else at risk too.
So the question is not like, can I somehow escape this risk? Because that's even in theory, that's impossible. The question is like, what is the appropriate threshold of risk?
Yeah.
Like for my life, and how does my wealth like factor into that appropriate threshold?
No absolutes in life, right? An absolute is likely a sign of an idol. If something is an absolute, right?
Right.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah.
And it could go the other way too.
Like, absolutely none. Is that what you mean?
Meaning like just kind of disavowing all.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. That's another kind of idol. Huh.
I think I think we've covered a little bit about like the topic of making wealth, and the challenges that come along with it. But in the process of making wealth, do we how do we go about the challenges of ethically making wealth?
That's a huge question. And this is what I love about being Christian, being Catholic, because I think that the church holds us accountable for how we engage in economic transactions, because the other side of any transaction is another human being. And therefore our transactions are interactions, and they're governed by morality.
Right. And it's so easy to forget that.
It's very easy to forget that in our modern world, because, I just go to the Walmart and I just pick up whatever off the shelf, right? And I might be getting one item that's made by some poor man, or poor people working in this part of the world, and this thing I make is, you have no concept of the people that are involved. You just go and get whatever you want on Amazon, and boom, it's there the next day, And it's not easy. But what the church invites us to, I believe, is to actually have a more conscious awareness of the people. And so, like, in other words, if instead of today I bought some coffee beans off Amazon, let's say instead of buying them from Amazon, I bought them from Chris. Like, Chris is growing coffee beans in his backyard. And I'm like, Chris, I'm only going to pay you $10 for that. He's like, look, man, I've been working all day on this stuff. Like, can you give me 15? I have to be aware of the humanity here, like, hey, this guy's been working really hard, I mean, and he's a nice guy. And, there's a human aspect to economic transactions, which that's perhaps the downside of our like mega global system right now. There's a lot of advantages, of course, but this is the downside.
Right.
You can forget the humanity of the other parties, the counterparty.
Yeah. Yeah. And to speak a little bit more, like to crack that open a little bit more, like it does provide a lot of advantages just because we've found ways for people to make a living off of basically every stage in the supply chain. But then, of course, now there's like 7 degrees of separation between me and the start of the supply chain.
Yeah.
Many people have commented on this. I'm thinking of a talk once given by Monsignor Shea, but, he pointed out like this is really the first era in human history where the primary concern of most people is not where am I going to get my next meal.
Oh yeah.
Like
it's unbelievable.
Yeah, like
how much progress we've made.
Right. I mean, and it's progress. It's a good thing, but it's also a kind of a novel problem. Like we've been wired for so much of human history to really just think about like what do I need in order to get to the next meal? Like, and when it comes to the sophistication of our economic systems, they've somewhat reflected that. It's like, okay, I'll pay you for this thing and then I'll do this favor for you because this is what I need to get through to like the next day or through the winter. But a lot of people don't financially plan or didn't financially plan 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line. You don't have the luxury of thinking about that. Like we have this brand new problem in some sense where like a lot of us have the ability to think like 5, 10, 20 years down the line. Retirement planning.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of a new-ish concept.
Yeah.
Like for the general population of humanity.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. But yeah, the ethics of how you make the money, kind of going back to your earlier point about speculation. What are your thoughts about that? People speculate on.
Could you share with our audience what speculation is?
Speculation is essentially when you have a derivative of some kind. It means that there is money that can be made or lost. How do I put this? Based on another variable, so like,
it's like betting.
A thing has value, but with speculation or derivatives, like what you're really doing is like you're not going off of the value of the thing, you're going off of the potential
of the value
changes of value in the thing.
Yeah,
basically.
Yeah. And so at its worst, it can be betting. Okay, because there are literally derivatives on weather and stuff like that.
Right? Or betting on the next pope.
So is there a derivative on that?
Hope not.
That would be funny.
I hope not.
If there's a derivative out there for that. It wouldn't surprise me. But the way these things develop is often legitimate. Okay. For example, actually, insurance is very similar to that, right? Because well, let me not go there because that would be complicated. But let's say you're a farmer and if a cold winter comes, you're going to lose all your crop, and then you're not going to be able to survive. So somebody could sell you a derivative based on the weather. So if the weather stays nice and warm, you'd lose your premium. You'd pay that premium every month. But if all of a sudden the weather goes down and it becomes winter and all your crop is dead, now they have to pay you out. So that's the way in which these kind of probably originally developed.
Actually, it's one of the first recorded historical cases of speculation was very, very similar to that. It was in ancient Miletus because it was Thales. Thales, who's known as to us from studies as the first philosopher.
Greece.
Yeah, Thales of Miletus. He in their world, in their context, olive presses were rented each harvest season by olive growers, and he tried to develop a system of predicting good weather each year. He knew that the weather was probably going to be good, and so he predicted a bigger harvest. So what he did was he bought all the olive presses in the area, and then from that he was able to like rent them out to people at a higher price. That would be an example of speculation. He's speculating that these olive presses are going to be more valuable for when harvest season comes and people need to use them. Of course, it can go the other direction where they could be less valuable because people don't need them as much. But like that's where the risk comes in with speculation. So
yeah. So, I mean, I think to really answer the question on speculation, we'd probably have to take a step back and go into ownership, meaning ownership of capital as in like stock market, right? See, the cool thing with ownership is that the cool thing with the stock market is that it allows everyone to be an owner of these large corporations, and so let's say, for example, there's a local pizza shop and you go to the guy and you say, hey, look, I've got some money I've saved up. I'm willing to invest in your company. You give me like a 20% share of your pizza shop. Mm-hmm. So now we get this infusion of money that help us expand the store, but then I also get a share of the profits, and now you're involved. You're actively involved in all the decisions and all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. The problem with the stock market is like for ordinary investors, the percentage of the company that you own is so absolutely minuscule. I mean, it must be like 0.0001, whatever, that you virtually have no control. So then what does it mean to own a stock? It means that I'm sort of going along for the ride in the sense that I think this company is doing well. I think it's going to grow. And so I'll jump on board with it, with my capital. But my capital does contribute to it. So and what I'm trying to say is the further and further that you move from control, I think the more it becomes like gambling.
Further you move away from control of where your money is going. Yeah.
Now, there's other arguments that could be made. Like in the example that you just made, some people would say that when capital is allocated to, like at a certain season, nobody wants those. What were they?
The olive presses.
Olive presses, whatever that is.
That's where you squeeze the juice out of the olive.
You press the olive. Yeah. So at a certain season, like nobody wants these olive presses. So by that person, Thales putting his capital there, it sort of balances out the economy because, that's why he gets a greater return from it because he helped balance the economy, right. Something that was undervalued but should have been more valued, So, but anyway, my rule of thumb in terms of like my moral compass is gambling is worthless. Gambling is to me the ultimate evil, of economics or, fiscal morality, because it's basically, I want to make money, but without contributing any value at all to the world, right? If you think of the ideal, I'm exchanging service, giving value, and I'm getting money in return. Gambling is the exact opposite of that. And so I think gambling is horrible. I hate it.
What about...
I also hate it because it exploits the poor a lot.
Yeah.
And so I think that whatever sort of complex financial instrument that you're doing, a derivative or whatever, the more it's like gambling and less like ownership, I think the more unethical it is.
What about investing in the stock market, though? How should a Christian approach that? Is that a sort of gambling that they're taking, or is that considered, how do we kind of see that as ethical or unethical?
Before we had talked about the concept of using capital to grow capital.
Yeah.
So for one, I think that intention should be there, and there for a good reason. Like I'm trying to grow this capital because, I want to use it to like, we'll talk about like, making a nest egg, or like kind of grow a trust that'll support the poor, the community, my children and grandchildren or something like that. That's one element. I think the other element kind of hits more on what you had just mentioned, Father, about is it more about me trying to contribute to the overall value of the system, and then like receiving value in turn from that, or is this me just trying to kind of make a quick, cheap buck off of other people's hard labor? and I don't think it's absolute.
Yeah, but I think you're right. I mean, I think that, again, people may disagree with me on this, but when it comes to things like day trading and such, I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of that because essentially what you're doing there becomes very similar to like a game of poker in the sense like, okay, I can figure out, and in those cases, it really is sort of a zero-sum game. Like I'm just making money off of other people losing money. That's the way I see it.
What is day trading?
So let me put it this way: if you make trades in a very, very short interval of time,
right?
What does that even mean? I think the ethical way of investing comes from a person who's not necessarily an ethical role model. Warren Buffett, in the sense like he is a.
We're not putting him as a pillar of morality.
Yeah, not putting him as.
But he's like one of the smartest investors.
Yeah. But in terms of ethical investing, I do think he's actually a great role model. Maybe not in terms of marriage morality, but his thing is don't buy a stock unless you'd be willing to own that actual company. So you have to think of it like the pizza shop. Like you wouldn't be like, hey, I'm going to buy 20% of your pizza shop, and then tomorrow be like, I sold this 20%. Now I made it. It's like. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And that's like sort of manipulating an otherwise good system.
Yeah. I think that, again, it comes down to the danger of like we said, we're kind of can take out the human dignity, the human element out of this when we start using money like this.
But even like to kind of get more into the weeds of some of those business principles that Warren Buffett follows, like, he's looking a lot of times at like people will say like good fundamentals. He's looking at the price to earnings ratio, and he's which we don't have to go into all that, but he's basically looking at like, is this a business that like runs a clean operation, generates healthy profits, is like guaranteeing success for their customers, which from a worldly perspective, like that's somebody who like, is a wise business person. Like you should want to put your money towards that person. Now, then, of course, comes the question after that, which we haven't hit on this element yet, which is like, is the company that you're investing in doing something ethical or unethical? And what is the appropriate threshold for ethical or unethical?
Well, speaking of Buffett, there was a graduation speech that he gave. I had heard this years ago. And he basically said something like, if you look around at your classmates and you see a person who's pretty competent, but they have good character as well, and you see another person who's competent and doesn't have good character, it's like, I would always put my money on the one with good character, because over 10, 20, 30 years, he's going to actually do well and succeed and all of that stuff. And that's the other advantage of long-term investing, is that because character is one of those things, morality is one of those things that, in a sense, pays off in the long term. Immorality, if you want to put it that way, pays off in the short term, right? Like if you're cheating, you can make a quick buck, and the investors who go along with you can make a quick buck as well. So that's the other advantage of thinking about this as owning. You wouldn't own a pizza shop that's running a scam or something like that, right? Yeah. Because then that eventually it's going to fall apart. Reputation, matters and all of that stuff. So, but then, so you think about the morality of the company. I'm an owner. Like I own this, I'm one of the owners of this company, even if you have 0.0000001%,
right.
I'm one of the owners. So I have to take
ownership of what they do.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a great way to approach it and a great way to approach investing. And we're running out of time. So I know there's a lot more we could talk about with regards to wealth, but just practically, for our listeners and just for ourselves too, do you guys have any suggestions of avoiding making money an idol in our lives as we continue to go about this world and bring to, make money as well? I know when I think of it, I think that the attitude of gratitude, like you were saying, that understanding that everything to me is given as a gift, and just keeping that in mind and the way I use money. But do you guys have any other suggestions that you would tell someone who's trying to make money and not helping them not see it as an idol?
I guess I would invite somebody to pay attention to the effects of their relationship with money, just as I would ask them to notice the effects of their relationship with anything else or anyone else, right? When a person makes something into an idol, what do idols do? Idols are like black holes that suck the life out of you, you know? So you'll find if a person is making money an idol, they'll be anxious. They can't sleep. They can't make a silent retreat because they're always thinking about their money. You know, it starts affecting this is so sad, but it can affect their relationships with their own family members. Like sometimes the relationships with their children even start falling under the lens of, well, you know, it's almost like you're costing me a lot. You know, it's like, ooh, you'll start seeing the way it'll suck the soul out of people. And that's the case with any idol. So I think, you know, once we can recognize those negative signs of idol worship, you know, then that's a place of repentance. And I think it primarily has to come, like, I think we have to get to the core of what's going on there, you know?
Yeah.
Because it could be, for example, sometimes people who grew up in tremendous financial insecurity and who are constantly afraid of, like, they're going to, you know, that actually, you know, we saw this in our study for this book, right? The kids who grew up during the Great Recession, right? They
2008 one.
The 2008 recession, they grew up to be much more risk averse because they grew up fearful about money, and so then they're afraid to take risk. You know, so some of it can be rooted in childhood stuff. I mean, it could be deep, but at least recognizing, hey, like I'm latching on to money for some kind of security or something. Yeah, that can be worked on.
You'd make a good spiritual director.
I suppose my input, I mean, there's many directions you could take it. It's such a vast topic, as you said, but one of the first places that my mind goes is that money as an idol or idol worship doesn't necessarily look the way we expect sometimes. And sometimes it's just what dominates my thoughts. What are my obsessions over the course of the day? You know, is this where a lot of my mental energy goes? That could be an indication that there's something wrong there, because like I can't help but think of Matthew chapter 6. Like, Jesus has commanded us to do certain things, but one of the things he very specifically commanded us not to do was to worry, and especially to worry about like food and money and clothes. And so I think that if I find it's becoming a worry, if I find it's becoming an obsession,
that's great. Yeah.
That is often an idolatry. That doesn't guarantee that it is, but often it is. It doesn't necessarily look like somebody who is corrupt or money obsessed or even living lavishly. Sometimes it looks like something much more quiet and pernicious. So I think just to recognize, like, you know, where do my thoughts go? Like, where is this becoming an obsession for me?
And the risky thing is that sometimes it's sort of like with really thin people like yourself, you know, where they're, I think I might have heard this from you or from somebody else. Maybe it was from you, where you're like, just because you're skinny doesn't mean that you're healthy, you know? But if you're skinny, the danger is that you might be like, well, I'm skinny, so I could just eat whatever I want, you know? It's similar with people who are not rich, you know, because the idolatry of money doesn't only affect the rich.
Yeah,
if all of your decisions are being made thinking of money in an excessive way, sometimes even the way that people save money, are afraid to spend money, it's like, you know, it's central. Money is central.
Can cripple you, right?
Yeah.
That's a great point. So, yeah. Thank you so much, guys. That was a great episode.
Yeah, well, we should make a disclaimer. None of us are financial experts. Nothing we say should be taken as financial advice. We're just curious people. We might have made some mistakes in what we said.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, guys. Great episode. That was fun.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the In Spirit podcast. In Spirit is an initiative of Amoris Christi, an apostolate dedicated to lay spiritual formation.
For more information and to keep up to date, you can visit our website at amoruschristi.org and follow us on social media.